Okay, and thank you, Dr. Pitt. And then Pastor Ford, the same question we would like to ask you as well.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Pitt that there's nothing that can be done about this grief pandemic. Christ tells us in his word that in this world we're going to have tribulation, but he says, be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. And so we're going to deal with this, and it's going to increase as more and more things begin happening on the earth. But we are living in unprecedented times where, as Dr. Rosie was saying, you know, people having to drop their loved ones off and not being able to be with them. I remember watching or actually reading an article where a woman had lost her husband and then to COVID, and then 2 days later, her son died. And she was in the funeral home standing between two caskets, and there was no one there to comfort her. And I thought it was just a difficult thing to see, and how people, our nurses would put the patient's hand on a warm glove to kind of simulate that a loved one was holding their hand. They would put two warm gloves, one on top and one on the bottom, so it would simulate that someone was holding their hand as they were passing away. And just unprecedented times, the stories that break your heart. We can't, those are things that are out of our control. But as Dr. Pitt said, we have to allow God to navigate us through these choppy waters that we have to go through.
You know, I really did not think about what some people were experiencing. I had experienced quite a bit of death before even the pandemic in my local church. But when I read about the people not being able to go to the hospital with their loved ones, and I've read about others being outside the window saying, can you just at least bring them to the window so I can wave to them if possible, wheel them there. And others, I had clients who had relatives in Canada that they could not go to see because of the pandemic, and they were dying, and they died. And they never, mothers, parents, they never got to say goodbye. And until I read the article about the stages of grief, I guess I didn't really think about how that could impact someone if they can't say goodbye. I guess the closure, wanting to hold the hand, wanting to hug, or I don't know, last words, the importance of that. And the article especially mentioned that it's, of course, all people, but it mentioned that as African Americans, that we've been through so much as far as loss, grief, discrimination, jobs, businesses, homes, whatever. I mean, we've just been through a lot. And so this season is going to impact us even more because we already have higher death rates. We already have higher preconditions like COVID that could exacerbate it, cause COVID or whatever, and make us susceptible to COVID. And so it said that, especially for African Americans, that this could be worse, this projected pandemic. Before we go to our last question, is there anything else that either one of you would like to add as far as the importance of, what the pandemic did, how it's really detrimentally impacted people, and maybe taking grief to a much higher level than we've known it?
I think one of the things that I am dealing with, for instance, last week I had a 10-year-old come in who was suicidal. His mom died about this month will be 1 year that she died from COVID. And so she was relatively young, as we look at death. But this 10-year-old is suicidal, and his decision was, I just want to go and be with my mommy. And, he hears it all the time, she's in heaven. And so if she's in heaven, then he feels like, if I kill myself, then I can just go to heaven and I'll be with her. Mm. So it has been interesting as I've tried to help both his dad and this little fellow realize that mommy is not necessarily in heaven, but, it becomes a very ticklish road because they've been told that story that they're in heaven. And for children especially, they don't quite understand, what in the world, why am I here? If heaven is such a good place, why can't I just go ahead and I can be with my loved ones? So it kind of brings us into a whole different realm of how do we speak to them about this, about death, and what does death really mean? So it becomes a really ticklish subject to handle.
Yeah, I never even thought about that realm, but that opens up a whole different can of worms that also will have residual effects in our world. But it's not just the death. There are people that are really grieving the loss. They've had jobs for 20 years and lost their jobs, lost their homes. These type of things are also devastating because it is a loss, and people have to grapple to reinvent themselves. I've read articles where people were ready to retire, are out about the age of retirement and lost their job and now have to grapple to try to find another job to make ends meet. And so all of these things have ramifications for the future. And it's not just the loss of a person, but a loss of everything that we have known, just the way of life that we have known. There's a lot of grieving going on with that as well. That we're going to see the effects of all of these different types of losses for years and years to come. Dr. Pitt just brought up that caveat that I had never even thought about, of a young child that is suicidal, wants to go and be with his mommy. There are just so many things that we have never had to deal with before, and we don't know. Just kids going to school and then having to go back and wear masks and learning things online and hybrid programs and all of these things, I think we're going to see residual effects for years to come.
Yes, and I think one thing Dr. Pitt had mentioned when I spoke to her before this interview was that it was difficult for her as a professional during the pandemic, not being able to wear a mask. You see people, you look in their eyes, but also the face, the smile. And so she said for her, the mask was, it blocks communication. And it's a barrier. And so that was a problem for her. But you also mentioned being able to come together. I know that I read that the addictions that people relapse at much larger rates during the pandemic because they were not able to come together and to be with each other, and to have that support. And then the churches, initially a lot of the churches shut down. And so it's like our entire world, it was upside down. It was turned upside down. And then supply chains, certain goods couldn't get through. Certain things went on the shelves. I mean, the entire world was just like turned upside down. And so that is why they're projecting this massive pandemic, grief pandemic to come through. And we want to just reiterate, loss of life, but also some people are not aware. And I want you all to just say a little bit about this, that, what happens if people don't grieve or they're not even aware? Like somebody listening right now might think, well, I thought grief was about death, the physical death, but I didn't realize that, I lost my job and I used to be depressed, and I had these things, for years now, and so I'm grieving. I'm grieving, or the house. We had to move, lost our house in foreclosure, and I just knew that I would be angry a lot. So I'm grieving.
Yes.
I'll let Dr.
think,
Pitt address that.
well, I think that yesterday I got my retirement funds investments came through, and I'd lost $4,000 or $5,000 of my retirement. And yeah, all of a sudden you find yourself like, what? I thought I had this nice egg nest just laid aside, waiting for me to retire when I should retire. And then all of a sudden you see just disintegrating before your eyes as a result of the pandemic and the economic collapse that seems to be coming on all of us. So yeah, that becomes a real loss. But going back a little bit further, I think one of the things that we have to address is the loneliness. A loneliness that cannot be described happens with this whole grief and the losses that we experience. And I think that that is a big part in our society, because with COVID, again, we've isolated people. Everybody has to be in their own little corners, 6 feet apart. Sometimes with losses, you just need that human touch, somebody that's going to just hold you for a minute. And I know that even with certain things that my husband and I just really enjoyed, now not having him, those are moments when it's just so lonely. And we know that loneliness is equivalent to smoking about 12 cigarettes a day. So we recognize that it is a significant thing that people are experiencing.
Yes, wow. And I also was.
I might be smoking about 4 cartons a day all day.
Watch your lungs.
Mercy. Wow. And something else that I noticed, that it mentioned that if you do not grieve, you're not aware you should be grieving, or you do not grieve, that also physical, that you could have, it could cause you to have physical problems, that some people might not be aware that depression, or maybe that pain, or even a medical condition, it could cause a medical condition to come on our bodies because of holding all of that stuff inside as well.
Yeah, I ran across a few people since I've been doing this facilitating that I didn't even know was a medical term, that's actually called heartbreak syndrome. When someone has lost someone, say that a couple like Elder Pitt, who's married 48 years and then all of a sudden doesn't have that spouse, that they actually, and a lot of people, once they lose a spouse, they end up passing away in a short time after that, losing that spouse. And it's called heartbreak syndrome, that mimics like having a heart attack, symptoms of a heart attack. So that just shows you that God has made our body so well that each component interacts with the other component. And I'm getting way out of my realm, and I'll let Dr. Pitt talk to that. But I do know that if we're not dealing with things emotionally, it can play in our physical health as well. It shows up in our physical health.
And I certainly agree with that. We are physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And if I always describe this to my clients, you're like a car. You need 4 good tires if your journey in your car is going to be successful. If your journey in life is going to be good, you need those 4 components, the spiritual, mental, emotional, and spiritual, to be intact as well. Because if any one of them is flat, it's going to affect your journey in life. And definitely we see all kinds of physical disorders as a secondary component of not managing their grief well.
Okay, and I guess we do need to touch on this, because if you mentioned this, Dr. Pitt, if I feel that my mother, father, whatever, are in heaven, And, you know, if I die and that's where I go right away, why am I hanging around here and missing them and going through extreme, you know, agony and depression and whatnot? Why not just kill myself? Especially if
Yes,
the children are all grown and, you know, I'm in my 80s and it was just me and my husband, or, you know, even if you're younger. I think there are at least two incidents, something that happened with your church, some of your church members, some connecting incidents. And I don't think you were counseling any of these people, but apparently there was suicidal thoughts, an attempt at suicide. And there was actually an actual suicide. I think you both know what I'm referring to. But why not just kill myself?
It doesn't make sense. Heaven. Right. And I have another young man, 17-year-old, whose dad did commit suicide. And the other thing that he has is my dad in hell? Is he burning and burning and burning? And that has become a real big issue that we've had to work through. So, you know, it's how the Bible portrays death is so relieving when people finally get it. Instead of this, they're all in heaven now and everything is fine, you know, because that brings up so many issues, especially when we're doing counseling.
So how does the Bible portray heaven that's so soothing? What either one of you can
that you're sleeping. You know, when you pass away, you're sleeping. And in that great resurrection morning, you'll be able to be reunited with your loved one if they fell asleep in Jesus. You know, Jesus says, blessed are the dead that die in the Lord, for they rest from their labors. And sometimes when I wish that my husband was back, I remember he is blessed because he is resting from his labors. For me, I have to keep on fighting. But suicide is not an option because that would not get me closer to him at all.
No, it circumvents who God is. It's like I'm taking the prerogatives that God alone has. I'm sorry,
Pastor, a little louder. Your voice is
Oh, I was saying that it's taking the prerogatives that only belong to God. If he has my days numbered, and I don't have the right to take his prerogative alone upon myself and be God. That's a dangerous thing, to try and take matters into my own hands as if I'm all knowing, all seeing, as God is. So it's a very dangerous process. But you can see how the enemy, if you understand this great controversy, you can see how it only suits the enemy. If he can isolate us, you know, they say that, you know, you can easily destroy someone if they are isolated. You know, just like a fireplace. If a coal jumps out of that fireplace, it's hot when it comes out of there, but if it's not joined with the other coals, it will soon go out. And that's the way with life. If the devil can isolate us, he feels that he can destroy us.
And I think we have to look at it too, based on what both of you are stating in the Bible. It says the dead know nothing. It says that they cannot praise, only the living can praise. If you look at death, it's the reverse of creation. We came from the ground, we came from dirt, the dust, we came from the earth, and then God, he formed and shaped Adam and then Eve, and then he breathed into him his life-giving agency or agent. He breathed that into him. And so what happens at death is you go back to the earth, and that the spirit, that's that life-giving agent from God. It goes back to God. It's nothing independent of your body. It's God. It came from God. It's his power. It's what he gave to us. It goes back to him, and it doesn't have any type knowledge. And there's scriptures all throughout the Bible to support this fact. So the first death, we sleep. And if you look in the Bible, when they went to look for Jesus and he had died, where did the angels go? Where did Mary and the others go? To the tomb. That's where they went. Okay, when Lazarus had been dead for 4 days, where did they go? And where did Jesus go to cause Lazarus to come back? He didn't go to heaven. He went to the tomb. He went to the grave. And so there are examples all throughout the Bible, and it can be very dangerous if we step aside from what the Bible said, in that they're resting, they know nothing, because then we can open up ourselves to the spiritual realm and satanic agencies. And so, but that's for something for another day, but just something to know and to focus on. And for anyone who's listening, you can follow up and you can look in your Bible, this topic from Genesis to Revelation prayerfully, and get answers directly from the Word of God. And finally, and of course, if there's something else you want to expound on, you can at this time. But the final question that I have for you both is concerning the fact that so many people, millions, are grieving, not just in the United States, but worldwide. But the article that I read was focusing on the US, but millions are grieving. People will continue to die. That's just the way it is until Jesus comes. What, from your personal experience, you both have experienced death from beloved spouses. And of course, you had other members of your family and friends to die as well. I know, Dr. Pitt, you mentioned that some of the church, your church family, you have a very small church, some of them died in addition to your husband. And so from your own personal experience and your professional experience and ministerial experience, is there anything that either of you would like to say to someone out there is listening, okay? They're grieving from various things, they're listening. Is there anything that you would like to say to them that could possibly give them comfort, could give them hope, could give them peace? Either one of you, beginning with Dr. Pitt.
There's a song that I think sums it up. What a friend we have in Jesus, all our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege to carry everything to him in prayer. In my practice, I've called it Christian counseling because I don't know how to help people apart from Jesus Christ. Jesus is the only one that can truly bring comfort. And even if it's a loss of something else, you know, your investments are gone down and you know, you've lost your home, or the folks in Florida have lost everything. Jesus is the only thing that I know that you can hold on to when times get really, really rough.
Okay, and Pastor Ford?
Yeah, I would just echo what Dr. Pitt has said, but there's one thing that I would just like to add, and that is, well, two things. No one grieves perfectly, so be easy on yourself. And then the other thing is, it's okay to love Jesus and love your therapist. You can get some help. Don't feel like you have to bear this alone, because nobody can get through the grief experience by themselves. Yes, we have God on our side, but it's nothing wrong with seeking help through a support group or a therapist. And in my case, I had the support group and a therapist because I needed to know what was going on in me. Sometimes you feel like you're going crazy. Be easy on yourself and allow yourself to get the help that you need to start your journey of healing.
Okay, and I want to make sure there's nothing else that either one of you would like to say before we close out. I want to thank you for being here this afternoon, taking time out of your busy schedules. I do want to say something. I know, Dr. Pitt, you mentioned that you are booked months out, and so you cannot take any additional clients. But Pastor Ford, one reason that I did have this, that I wanted to do the show is because I heard about you being a part of a grief ministry. And I actually had, me personally, I had never heard of a church focusing on grief. And also what really delighted me was to find out that individuals can go through the program that you're in, that you're going to tell us about, and they can start their own chapter in their city if they feel impressed by God to do so. So kind of like the way Celebrate Recovery is spread out nationwide like that. And I thought, you know what, this is awesome. Because when I read about this coming grief pandemic, I thought, you know what, we need people. God needs people all over the world. You know, he needs people in as many cities as possible. So I said, you know, we need to get this word out. We need to get this information out, because I heard how it helped you, this program. So can you tell us about this program and give us some type of information as to how anyone who's watching, who's interested, can access this program?
Yes, the program is Grief Share, and you can go to www.griefshare.org. Again, www.griefshare.org. And you can get the information that you need. There will be local groups that are near you. Many of them are meeting in person. Mine is by Zoom, because we not only try and help people in our local area, but other people who don't, that are in different areas in the world, can also sign on, and we can be a help to. It's kind of like a global ministry rather than just localized. And so there are many. I think every church needs to have a grief ministry, because we're all going to be touched by it in the years to come. And this is a way that we can, some people are not ready for a Bible study. Some people are not ready to come to church, but this is one of those entering wedges that the church can use to minister to people that are hurting. And once they begin the healing process in the hurting places, they are more apt to listen to other things that you may have to say. So I think it's a very vital ministry for these times that we live in.
I want to thank both of you once again for being here this afternoon. And to our listening audience, please remember, what has been by the grace of God doesn't have to continue to be, and what hasn't been by the grace of God can be. This is Cynthia Talbert. You're listening to The Awakening. Until the next time, have a nice afternoon. Goodbye.